Cioni sasare
Ishino Iwa Oto Narite Kokeno
Mushu Made.
In 1921, a small army of government bureaucrats began streaming into Palau. Dressed in white linen uniforms with starched collars, they were to administer Japan's new colony. Koror, Palau would be the capital. Branch offices were established in each of the 6 regions: Saipan, Palau, Yap, Chuk, and Ponape, in addition to the marshals.
The Japanese, they called their government here as Nangyocho. And Nangyocho can translate into literally means the South Seas government. You know, the Japanese somehow have a romantic view of Micronesia.
White-clad civil servants soon were everywhere. They staffed the offices of a large government bureaucracy that oversaw all aspects of island life. They scuttled in pith helmets over village paths as teachers, medical aides, agriculture extension agents, and policemen. The size of the Japanese administration stood in sharp contrast with the small German administration some years before. By the mid-1920s, there were 900 civil servants, and 10 years later there were 1,400.
Teman to harbulis mardi adra adenki mar adra sers otoktan.
The Japanese Navy had swept into the islands at the start of World War I to annex the former German possessions. At the end of the war, with the strong support of Britain, Japan secured formal authority over the islands, against U.S. opposition. In 1919, at the Paris Peace Conference, the islands were entrusted to Japan to be governed as a mandated territory under the newly founded League of Nations. Japan was to be given full recognition of the administering authority of the islands it had taken from Germany in 1914. Why was Japan so interested in Micronesia?
Japan, being the most powerful country in Asia at that time, you know, like any European colonial power, they wanted to establish overseas colonies.
It was natural that the country should look south, beyond the Bonin Islands, to the islands in which Japanese traders had been active for 30 years.
So it was looking southward to Micronesia with the covetous eyes, you know.
Micronesia offered Japan access to the riches of the entire South Pacific. Japan intended to extend its influence into the islands and to turn a profit at the same time. According to their League of Nations mandate, the Japanese were to promote material and moral well-being and the social progress of the islanders. In other words, they were to bring these people the blessings of civilization. Civilization, that is, with a strong Japanese flavor.
The Japanese administration was very, very intense, and it was really in your face, you know, and overwhelming. And it sort of awed the Micronesians.
There were early signs of success, according to a journalist who visited the Marshalls in 1920.
The women wear their hair in the Japanese style. Their wardrobe is not complete if they do not have a colored Japanese fan and a multi-hued kimono. The young islanders are like Japanese cadets in their khaki outfits and black caps. In short, since 1914, there has been a complete cultural revolution in the Marshalls. Thomas McMahon, 1920.
But the Marshalls was not the whole of Micronesia. The island group had a head start in modernization thanks to the longer and more intense period of German rule. Elsewhere in Micronesia, there was more resistance to new ways. In Palau, for example, a reactionary group known as Micronesian was formed.
Micronesian is it's like a religion, and they use it as a way to resist Japanese occupation of Palau.
But most Micronesians quickly accepted this newly imported culture.
I have a friend, Japanese, small boy. We start to use stick, haki. So I'm the one who did stick whenever I go. So they say, oh, who's Japanese?
The civilization that the Japanese hoped to promote, though, went far beyond the type of dress they wore and the kinds of food they ate. It embraced the way they looked at life, how they thought, and what they believed. Profound changes needed to take place if Micronesians were to be truly civilized, Japanese administrators felt. And how might this be done? The Japanese representative to the League of Nations spelled out their approach.
Education and religion are the two methods most likely to ensure in the long run the educational development of the inhabitants. These are the most appropriate and effective means of developing a civilized people. Mitsusada Horiguchi, 1920.
The Japanese administration was not long in taking action. Admiral Yamamoto appealed to the Pope for priests and brothers, and soon Spanish Jesuits were sent to open a new mission in the islands. 4 pastors from the Japanese Congregational Church also arrived to begin work in Chuuk and Pohnpei. German Lebensel missionaries were invited to resume their work and set up new stations in the west. And so, non-Christian Japan brought in missionaries to assist in its civilizing mission. Education, the other pillar of the Japanese plan for development. Public schools were unknown in the islands before the Japanese arrived. Prior to this, the only schools, with the exception of one on Saipan during German times, were mission-run. Each morning, children from the age of 8 attended class in one of the kogako, the public schools located on every major island in Micronesia. There were 24 of these schools in all.
I went to Japanese school. I'm learning to speak Japanese. I read the very simple, they call katakana.
Reading and math, science.
The math and the language we are taking.
And some of the Japanese histories and drawing.
What was in Japan? In Japan? I got me pick Japan.
Students were also instructed in basic vocational skills.
Niya awan tatok liki nan matulag.
We have garden, doing farming. We're planting carnation flowers, very nice.
And the girls, I remember my oldest sister learned how to sew.
And you can learning how to draw or carving. The most the boys. After carnation is flower, we have to carry it and we bundle and we have to go again to all the Japanese housing wife to selling 10 cents a piece with Japanese money.
And then, this, the moral teaching was very strict, to love one another or, respect for elderly.
Second dimension ka par kopen na dimension ka second. Dokan sa ban ta taiso exercise mention ko.
Taiso every morning. Different kind of exercise from first, second, third, fourth. There's already the rules, what kind of exercise. After the Taiso, we greet the emperor.
At yung pataw ka ruwa kit piaptaw na la yawas at Japan ni kit sopela. Tung sigul ko Rusian. Takin ruwa siya. Saikeret. Koros kiti. Nek, sa aking pitulungan ang class ko.
Meanwhile, for Japanese children, there was a parallel school system. The Shogako, schools for Japanese, offered a longer and more advanced education.
Meutan local in Pompeii, or utan Japanese citizen there, competition. So the school to attend to.
In all the schools, discipline was strict.
The policy was to produce a good student, a good citizen of Japan. So everything was taught, but very disciplined way.
The discipline was very strict in the classroom because the learning process that the Japanese were using was the rote memory thing. If you're not paying attention, you've missed something and you don't learn, you don't memorize.
When you do something wrong, bagero, always warukuchi, bagero, kisama, coñero.
Kamakam, ayo reporia, ayo repokia. So to usang, no papa pumpi.
If you did something wrong, you went in front of the class and held the chair up high.
Seperti aku panggil minus kaikan kasih kol pil pisinin pil pagkatar puram uyata misut.
Ngarap aja bakal bujeri na ina put perenju takan cipe juan raga empak. Human ngai ba chongol la rongol minute.
And they put us sometime outside the yard and put your hand up like that, kneel underground, on the ground for like 1 hour. Very, very strict.
But according to my father, the results were favorable because they did learn, a great deal.
In American school, you spend 12 years learning English, and after 12 years, you still don't speak English well. In Japanese school, after 3 years, we speak fluent Japanese.
The Japanese schools offered 3 years of basic education for all who lived within walking distance of one of the schools. For the better students, 2 years of additional education were offered in special schools located in the towns.
Palauan youngsters went to a three-year basic curriculum. And then the best students went on to a supplementary program of 2 years. And those students had to come into to Koror.
Those attending the supplementary schools had the opportunity to hone their Japanese language skills.
In that second year, almost every student was farmed out to a Japanese family to be a tea boy or to be a domestic helper or to run errands. And so that's where they polished their language.
At the very pinnacle of the education system was a carpentry school in Koror.
Students who were really motivated and able went on to the carpentry school. People like David Ramrui, Wilhelm Rangel, George Ngarasol attended.
A handful of islanders, chosen from everywhere in the Mandate, attended this school. There they learned drafting, basic architecture, and the building trade. Its vocational arts program was a rough equivalent of a college education in those days. Even after young Micronesians left school, their informal education continued through the Seinen Dan, or youth groups. These youth groups offered young people a variety of activities under all the trappings of a formal association.
Seinendang, that's kind of young people from about 18 to 25.
With Japanese advisors in step beside them, young people, neatly uniformed and carrying their banners, drilled and marched to the time of a shrill whistle.
They were disciplined like soldiers anyway. It's a civilian kind of civilian soldiers or something. They do a fire drill, you know, in case a bomb hit the village, and they do those kind of training.
Or the members might parade off to repair roads or do other volunteer work for the community.
Orang Melakai dan atum ceruk borong yang arato bol atau nation atir. So mga niya ruol era perlu en sepi ilmu lekor saya nenda.
Or they might prepare items for handicraft displays at the yearly fairs or compete in singing contests.
Teru teru bozu, ashita tenki ni shite kudasai.
Den mushi mushi katatsumori, omae no atama wa doko ni aru?
At other times, the young men might march off to the playing field for a track and field day or a baseball game.
The Japanese government has a very keen in sport, and the Palawan Seinendang was part of that. Swimming, the track and field, and then especially baseball.
And also undokai. Undokai is one big thing for the school, for the whole school. Undokai is games for the boys, for the girls. The whole day, the whole school, the whole day, the whole family will come join, and they will celebrate the whole day. It's once a year. So they will choose from the top, the best. So this school have a sensu, this school have a sensu. The two sensu are going to play. And they have a prize for the winners.
And then in the end, we compete for reading, we compete for math, we compete all that kind of thing. We have to compete. For running, I was not fast, but when it comes to math, I always win.
The pomp and spectacle of these contests were as appealing to young Micronesians as the athletics. The effects lingered on long after the Japanese era ended, in the pomp of field days, with the banners and uniforms and whistles and the marching teams.
てくれるのそよ風よ着物いない
Japanese education, formal and informal, was intended to civilize the young, prepare them to elevate their standard of living. For some, it did. Upon completing school, a number of islanders found jobs as messenger boys or held other minor positions.
Next school, you apply to talk in government. To talk in office.
After 5 years of schooling, they were hired by a company. They are mostly a delivery boy. They were delivering things on bicycle. They used to say, "Oh, I was a driver for Nangyocho, this Moro school and all that." It was one of the, prestigious work for us.
They were working in the telephone operation, they were working in mechanics, they were messengers. In Koror, that's where all the activity was.
The locals, they were just outside, grass cutters and cleaners and stevedores.
The education system was producing Japanese speakers and offering job opportunities for some. But it was the Japanese and Okinawan immigrants, even then streaming into the islands, who benefited the most from the new jobs opening up. Copra production was still an important source of income for Micronesians during these times. Nanyoboeki Kaisha, or Nambo as it was commonly known, operated retail stores throughout the islands. The Japanese goods stocked in these stores were traded for copra.
Kimi morge orang medical call. Tama pani orang. Pon pe pogel lau ya. Yar kimi morge orang. Kak tu kedagan merai yang pe. Armaj bel kabuki soya kang soy.
Nambo also acquired many of the coconut plantations that had once been run by the Jesuit Company and other European trading firms. Over 70,000 acres in all. Copra production doubled during the early Japanese period and brought in nearly 2 million yen a year. But copra was no longer the only industry, or even the biggest industry in the islands. Japan continued to run the phosphate mining operation on Angaur that it inherited from the Germans. Hundreds of Micronesians were brought in from neighboring islands to provide the labor for the mines. They lived, as they had before, in wooden barracks, worked long hours, and exchanged dances and songs with one another in the evenings.
Oh, sometimes they drink in shamisen. Oh, dancing.
In fact, some of the Palawan dance, actually like a matamatong, is really originate from other neighboring islands in Micronesia. I think it was part of that exchange of people working there from different islands.
Phosphate yielded 1 million yen a year at that time. But this industry, too, was overshadowed by a new source of revenue. Haruji Matsuo first arrived on Saipan in 1920. He had already made a name and a fortune for himself cultivating sugar in Taiwan. Now he wanted to see whether sugar might also be grown in the Marianas. After inspecting the soil and determining that the land was suitable for cultivation, Matsuo established a new company. Nanyo Kohatsu Kaisha, or Nanko, it was called. Matsuo brought in thousands of Okinawans and gave each a small plot of land to farm, on condition that they sell their sugar to him.
All the farm in Saipan, like 20% like tapioca plantation, 80% sugar plantation.
3,000 acres of Saipan's fertile plain was cleared and planted, and a sugar refinery was built. Chamorros and Okinawans farmed this vast swath of land.
कि मॉडर्न जी की बनानी कोई दो ना मॉडर्न जी की बनानी इनके कंपनियां जी आले बाका वालोडू डिस्पेस वासाउले दा पुसी tinadung este papa pusi hojo na matatanu.
There's a train, cargo train, to bring the sugar cane loaded, and they bring to the factory in Chalankanoa, where the church is.
O carga está 380 manos de carreta para Vatugane, para uma descarga aqui para o Alei Trem.
Within a few years, Matsuo's company was producing 1,200 tons of sugar a day. But Matsuo saw opportunities for even further expansion. By the early 1930s, he had land under cultivation on Tinian and Rota as well. With 15,000 acres planted in sugar, the industry was bringing in over 6 million yen a year, far more than all other industries combined. The sugar industry was bound to have an enormous impact on these islands.
They have a train from Chalankanoa to Garapan, then Garapan to Tanapak. They train back and forth. And so, like Saturday, Sunday, when the train come out, they allowed us just go to ride in. Then each place they say, okay, this is your place, so get down.
The Japanese and Okinawan population in the Northern Marianas exploded, from well under 2,000 in 1920 to more than 40,000 by 1937. On Saipan, businesses blossomed in Garapan to provide for the growing Japanese community. There were shoe stores, geisha houses, barber shops, ice cream parlors, bathhouses, and movie theaters.
They have theater, movie every night. They have restaurant, karaoke, stores all over on both sides of the road. I remember I used to go to the dentist, a very good dentist.
Other specialty shops opened: tofu factories, sword makers, and sake brewers.
Soba dan nalago papa. Jara melong na nagsamalu itomay.
I know any kind of candy I can buy. All different kind of drinks, ice cream, ice cake. That will be our our break.
With its electrical power, phone service, and radio station, Garapan had become almost indistinguishable from any other small Japanese city. New schools sprouted for the children of the Japanese and Okinawan immigrants. By 1935, Garapan had a population of about 10,000, nearly all of it foreign.
That time, everybody just have to get together, like we call plaza. If we're going to have a program, we call gakunekai. Even the soju coming, Okinawan, anyone, the Japanese student have to come in and dancing and singing.
Tinian and Rota too felt the effects of the sugar industry. By 1935, towns had sprung up all over the islands. There were 14,000 people living on Tinian alone. Sugar would be the mainstay of the economy throughout the Japanese era. Haruji Matsue, the Sugar King, had made his mark on the islands. He and the industry he founded had also made them self-supporting. Life would never be the same after the years of Japanese prosperity. The land had amply fed the Micronesian people for centuries. But the Japanese government was determined to find ways that the land could provide cash exports too. If sugar was such a success, why not other crops as well? The government built an agricultural station on Pohnpei in the mid-1920s that soon became world famous for the variety of crops it was growing. Small experimental farms were started in Yap, Chuk, and Jaluit as well. But nowhere did these agricultural efforts flourish more than in Palau. Beginning in 1926, the the administration invited Japanese families to Palau, provided them with tracts of land in Bebeldaup, and encouraged them to grow vegetables for export as well as for local consumption.
The actual agricultural development in Bebeldaup started when these Japanese were brought in. There was a Yamatomura in Ngatpang, one colony of Japanese farmers. And then there was Asahimura in Ngarmlungui. They started to cultivate coffee and cacao.
Before long, a few of these farming communities abandoned vegetables in favor of a single crop, pineapple. As pineapple production increased, the Japanese built a canning factory, and then another.
Pineapple, especially pineapple, something that they can export or use it themselves. There was a cannery in Ngarmlungui. That was where the biggest cannery was there.
By the end of the 1930s, there were 5 small settlements of Japanese farmers and their families on Bebeldaup. In all, 300 Japanese farming families made their living in Palau. Still other families moved in after 1938, when a Japanese company began mining operations for bauxite in 2 remote areas of Bebeldaup.
Yeah, bauxite was mined in Ngarmlungui and Ngartmao. The bauxite was right on the surface of hills. So they just go and terrace it and mine them. And then there was a thriving village or a town in Ngartmao with a Japanese school. Even the school was built there.
Meanwhile, Koror, now that it was a capital of the Japanese Mandate, was also being transformed into a modern port town. The Koror of 1920, as one newly arrived Jesuit priest described it, was no more than a rustic village.
If you could imagine a pretty park 2 kilometers long, divided by a single wide road, with 42 houses scattered under the palm trees, you would have an idea of Koror. Father in the Les Uliera, 1922.
By the end of that year, the transformation of Koror was already underway. The Japanese put up a double-winged administration building that would serve as the Nanyo-cho headquarters. At the other end of town, a team of laborers was putting up 300 housing units for Japanese government employees and their families.
It was a bustling town from maybe the mid-20s on to the war. Today's courthouse or judiciary building was the location of the Palau local government. There was a post office, there were shops, there was a department store.
Well, Koror, when I was young, they were stores that for materials, for all kinds of clothing. They were all different kind of stores.
Palauans remember they could walk through the town from building to building because they had eaves and you wouldn't get wet during a heavy rain. So it was a very impressive little town.
Koror's growth was further spurred when it became a resort for Japanese pearl divers during the late 1920s. The divers, who worked off ships in the Arafura Sea off New Guinea, spent the winter months in Koror. They came with money to spend and a thirst for excitement.
And when they come, they have a load of pearl, mother of pearl and give it to Mikimoto, and they had their rest here. They had all kinds of nice place to go here. There were a drinking place, geisha house. They're more like a prostitution house, but they were all over. That's a geisha lane.
All the while, Koror continued to grow. By the end of the 1930s, there were about 15,000 Japanese living in and around the town. With its dozens of government buildings and hundreds of stores, Koror had become a genuine city. What was life like in Koror in the 1930s?
Every turn is Japanese. There were more Japanese than Palawans.
I don't think there was much integration. And frequently, Palawans will tell you, yes, we were second-class citizens, and there was no doubt about it. We were tomin, which the term used for islanders, it had this negative connotation to it.
Taxi service was here, bus service was here. More bicycles were here than cars. Everybody would.
Maktobras yak langar orera mande ngilaki ngararat. Petoka omaral ngarar sekati ngarat dan mon mo kiri la kumangay. Namun tiar se ngarat.
Couleur heda quaret hatian heda quaret tial erak. Jadi gini tak ma teblol yang hakiom arab el ang ekmal masubong ang mok el sel atal sa kontrol mora sebadonga kikmal banget mok mam el sel asa dia aki sel bol terbese ya aki mungkin el an jem lek mungkin telam nar heda quaret milit mo sel tiu klok aki mo haram mal se mal ko tangar babal so mama tar ma kem sensa imol balato ngar nya au mo ri ai kangar rom ra ati okang malake muti ai ke gitu mo ri.
Palawans may have been no more than spectators in the economic miracle that had transformed their islands, but they applauded loudly from the sidelines. In late 1928, an Okinawan by the name of Tomoshiro settled in Chuuk, built a small dory, and began fishing for bonito. He was a wave of the future. By the mid-1930s, there were 1,500 fishermen, mostly Okinawan, scouring the island waters for bonito.
Okatsubushi is a tuna fish, and they take away the bones and they make sashimi. But instead of sashimi, they dry it, the meat, drying the sun. And that's quite popular for the Japanese because they use that for many things, for the soup especially.
Factories went up in Chuuk, in Palau, and on Saipan. The Okinawan fishermen lived in the villages among the people and often took wives there.
Every time they come in, I'm like a family, because right next door, they clean the tuna and they throw the head, and I pick up and clean right on the ocean.
By 1937, the katsuobushi industry was bringing in 5.5 million yen a year. It was the second largest export in the islands. Only sugar was larger. Toloas, the district center of Chuuk, took on much of the flavor of a Japanese town.
There were restaurants, there were barber shops, there were geisha houses, there were theater groups, you know, the whole bit. They had everything set up because that little Tokyo was set up to cater to the military establishment.
For entertainment, people could watch sumo wrestling in the town plaza.
Ada simur barra berawal ra. Ayo tu seperti para orang simur apa dia kido. Dia rakar be fi ko be betul kurwa fi rakar be ari be el team. Fe for el team with the team. Terus el team ubar el team. Simur bar ewesin. Atau farid terkufagar ka menni for ebat. Digi-digi episode fifiu pun libasia atau simur ke origi we siada besar tak fagar.
Pohnpei had an even larger metropolitan center. Colonia enjoyed telephone service, electricity, and a sewer system. With its Japanese population, however, the town was as much a foreign enclave as ever.
The town was just Japanese because most of the locals were living in their own land. So when they would come in by canoe with a couple of bags of copra, come and sell the copra and then buy some canned goods to go home.
The main road in Colonia, one visitor reported, was a well-lighted street of stores half a mile long.
Mencapai hutan bagai ke Colonia, kacil, pergi irai patu di cawan tu ke kota, halaman saya nak bukan tu kota.
The town had stores of every description. Butcher shops, curio shops, liquor stores, ice cake stands, and bicycle repair shops, besides the usual restaurants and bars.
Ami armagodo arnos wenosham. Konos tosin no, torma megis my tosin no. Ije kurkola, aria pri,
Japanese life was not embraced so willingly in every part of Micronesia. Koror, a stronghold of the Protestant Church for nearly a century, distanced itself from this foreign culture as much as it could. Yap too resisted Japanese-imposed modernization from the very start. The Japanese ridiculed Yapese traditional dress and forbade customary village exchanges. The result was a standoff between the local people and the administration.
I think they knew that they cannot openly resist Japanese rule. So, they would comply with the Japanese, but then they would go off secretly and conduct their own traditional Yapese ceremonies out of the sight of the Japanese, sort of to it passively.
The main point of contact between the Japanese administration and the people was the police force.
Junkei, police. Something goes wrong in the villages, they're reported to them and they will investigate.
Kotiar kita konim jagao, koila cholte. We are warwaran, mayor we are. Nen kito ke lati dia. Ayar memang kon kalau ke kon bundo dia bang tokala.
Policemen kept the peace, but they also collected taxes and supervised public projects. The islanders who served on the force stood at the peak of the job pyramid. The Japanese also appointed village and municipal chiefs, although there was more show than real authority tied to these positions. Chiefs met in district councils, but the agenda was determined by the government.
And that's when government of Japan have something, they call them in and give them an order there, right there. They used to call high council. Yes, council.
Many Micronesians today recall Japanese times as well-regulated and peaceful. But they also admit that the orders came from the Japanese administration. Islanders' input into their own political order was minimal.
The Micronesians had no participation in the affair of their islands.
It was the same thing with the economic miracle that was occurring in the islands. Whatever local production there was, copra making, farming, construction, was far overshadowed by the giant industries that depended nearly entirely on foreign labor. The islanders were marginal in the economy of their own islands. In 1937, the foreign population in the islands numbered 62,000, and it would swell by another 30,000 by the end of the decade. Micronesians, all 50,000 of them, had become a minority in their own islands.
They brought in large number of Japanese. By 1940, the Japanese were outnumbering Micronesians, almost 2-1.
The economic machine that the Japanese administration had built churned out more and more each year. On a per capita basis, the tiny territory of Micronesia was far and away the most productive part of the Japanese overseas empire.
Within 15 years of their occupation of Micronesia, they worked a miracle here, economic miracle here. The Micronesian economy was booming.
But this development came at a price. Loss of land was part of that price. By the mid-1930s, the Japanese government owned twice as much land as the islanders themselves owned. All the while, Japanese nationalism was becoming ever more strident. Its militarism was distancing Japan from the world community. In September 1931, the Japanese army swept into Manchuria and forcibly annexed it. Then, in 1935, Japan withdrew from the League of Nations. Despite protests from other nations, Japan insisted on retaining its mandated territory. The South Sea Islands are Japan's lifeline, as the old Japanese naval slogan put it. When Japan invaded China in July 1937, the nation made a decisive break with the West. Beleaguered and alone, Japan called on its empire to close ranks and dedicate itself more than ever to mutual co-prosperity. The goal of the Micronesian Mandate would be to contribute what it could to the welfare of the Japanese Empire. Micronesians were swept up into the vortex of these events. They began each workday singing Kimagayo, the Japanese national anthem. Before their classes, school children bowed to the imperial palace in Tokyo and recited the oath to the emperor.
私は立派な日本人になります。I will be a good Japanese citizen.
Cingomoni waga koso koso kuni. This is to the emperor. Cingomoni waga koso koso kuni wa hajimuru koto koen ni toko tazuru korko shinkona waga shinmin yoku chuni yoku koni kokoro itsu ni shite yoyobi yo naseru wa kore waka.
The Shinto religion, embodying the national ideals of Japan, became a focal point of the nationalism that was washing over the Mandate. In late 1940, a new Shinto shrine was dedicated in Koror.
This was a very high-ranking shrine. So, in a sense, it illustrates a burst of nationalism. These are our islands.
But even as the rites were being conducted, the clouds of war were gathering. There was dark talk that Japan had begun fortifying the islands, and rumors of a submarine base being built on Saipan. Micronesia was preparing to enter a new and terribly stormy period in its history.
Atal